Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Think Like a Hacker, Defend with Precision, a webinar from Smart Tech 247, which continues our conversation from Zero Day Con. My name is Gavin Egan, and I'm delighted to be joined here this morning by Melissa Goldsmith and Eddie Skraba. Melissa, currently threat hunting lead and subject matter expert at NBC Universal. Melissa brings over 15 years of experience in incident response and cybersecurity, combining her military background with time in the product world, with time in financial services, and now at NBC. Melissa, you're very welcome here today. Thank you for joining us. We're also joined by Eddie Skraba, Global Director of Threat Intel at Smart Tech 247. Eddie brings 20 years of experience in IT and IT security, starting off life as a full stack developer onto cybersecurity, and has taken a background in breaking the rules into now being called Chief Hacker at Smart Tech 247. So today we're here to talk about the theme, Think Like a Hacker and Defend with Precision. For me, what this means for companies today, we're increasingly facing a growing threat landscape, right? A threat landscape that's growing in size and also the complexity of the threats that we're facing. Internally, we're under huge pressure from a resource perspective. So acting with precision is really key to us working both efficiently and effectively. And I'm delighted to be joined by our two experts today to dive in and talk a bit about this. So Eddie, if I can actually go to you first. Taking a hacker perspective, can you take us through the threat landscape today, and what that means to the people who've joined us on the call?
Sure, Gavin. Okay, so yeah, let's talk about a bit about threat landscape. As Gavin mentioned, my offensive security experience allows me to share the how it looks from the other side of the fence, from the hacker's point of view. But let's jump into it. So the threat landscape is a dynamically evolving environment consisting of different threats, threat actors, and their motivations and vulnerabilities. And to be able to defend yourself, you got to know and understand the threat landscape. So looking at different types of threats that are in the threat landscape, we have those types haven't changed drastically over the years, but the tactics and techniques that are used to realize those threats are evolving constantly. So at the top of the type of threats, we had ransomware, which has impact on the availability and confidentiality of data. It is worth to mention that a lot of different threats are actually involved in the full ransomware attack, like for example, social engineering and installing malware, threat against data. This all happens during a full ransomware attack. One thing that I think is worth to mention, looking from that hacker perspective at the ransomware type of threat, is that why the obvious implications of a ransomware attack, which can be like obviously legal implications and availability of a business. I've seen the people sometimes miss that the fact that the leaked data may also contain some confidential information that can be abused later in a further attacks. So this is also an important to be aware of when we're looking at ransomware threat types. We got denial of service attack, which is a threat against the availability. And also a word thing to mention from my point of view is that it's not always up to the typical distributed denial of service threat type, where it's a matter of seeing who has better computing resources. Sometimes improper application configurations or performance, so typical engineering or IT team issues may result in a situation where a denial of service attack doesn't have to be distributed. It doesn't have to be performed by the large bots, farm of bots. It can be, done from somebody's home with small computing resources. We, of course, have different types of social engineering, with phishing being the most abused as an initial attack vector, but It's not only about phishing with emails. We are using a lot of social platforms and social media for communications. We use different communication platforms like Telegram, Zoom, like this one. Those platforms and those communication app channels are also abused in the social engineering attacks, and those attacks are performed to either get credentials or perform some lateral movement or trick somebody to install some malware. Yeah, we have the malware type of threats where the malware can be installed either to get some information like stealer logs. They can be installed for gaining persistence, access to somebody resources, or sort of backdooring. And also, I think worth to mention from my point of view is that sometimes I've seen people trying to say that they are not in a risk of an attack because they don't have any sensitive data on their resources. This is a bad approach because data is not the only resource that threat actors are for. You may own a simple blog website and web server that only stores some posts of your company, but that server, that blog is actually can become a part of somebody's botnet, can be used in a later escalation or pivoting of the attack by threat actors. So don't get fooled by the fact that if you don't hold any sensitive data or valuable data for cyber criminals, that you will not be affected by an attack. The other threat types are information manipulation and supply chain attacks. When we look at threat actors and at their motives at the top of this list, we have cyber criminals, which their most typical motive is to get a financial gain. But not only, there is still a matter of reputation. Unlike it was decades ago, where the reputation was only motive for hackers to gain, it is currently still like a valuable thing among the cyber criminal community, because for example, if I want to become a hacker and I want to steal some valuable data that I will be able to sell on some hacker forum, I gotta get a reputation on that forum. Nobody. It's like it's simple business. Nobody will buy from me if I don't gain some reputation. And for that, what I'm doing, I'm targeting those low profile, low level websites, easy to exploit. Again, as I said, you may own a simple blog on the WordPress. You may own a very short list of newsletter subscribers with 100 of email addresses, and you may think, yeah, I'm not at risk of any attack because who wanted to get a list of 100 email addresses? Yeah, threat actors would like to get that because they want to release that on free on some forum and gain reputation that way. We got obvious nation state actors and hacktivists. Both of those groups are motives are purely geopolitical, and the most typical threat types they perform is denial of service attacks. And there are, of course, insiders, which may be either motivated by financial gain, when they can be tricked by some cyber criminals in order to perform some initial to give some initial access, or they may have personal motives where they somebody is leaving a job, but they just want to cause some impact on their employee. Looking at some statistics, we can see these are statistics from previous year, but as I said at the beginning, not much has changed. So most typical threats are the ransomware and denial of service attacks. Later we have threats against data, social engineering, malware, information manipulation, and web threats. Some other statistics, these are, well, not from the last 30 days because the screenshot was generated a couple of days ago, but we can see how much attacks are performed within a range of 30 days. So we have over 300. We have 300 ransomware attacks reported in a time frame of 30 days, and we can see the most targeted industry is education. Then we have government and administration, information technology services, financial services, government and public sector, networks, communication, e-commerce, and so on. And as you can see, those threats are being realized in the global threat landscape all day, every day. So in order to be able to protect ourselves, we got to understand this threat landscape, and we got to face some challenges within the industry. The background that you're actually seeing in the slide is representations of somebody's environment. As you can see, it's a very complex environment, and these are the environments that you have to protect. So, from obvious reason, you won't be able to monitor the whole threat landscape. So you got to narrow down the information that you gather from threat landscape to only the threats that may affect your environment. Yeah, but to do that, you obviously got to understand your environment. And, this is where the challenges come from. So one of the typical industry challenges is that currently we are way beyond the typical IP. The asset is much more these days than a typical IP in the network. So we have different types of assets like network devices, servers, endpoints, cloud, databases, email system, domains, third-party integrations, physical security system, OT, IoT, things. And all those types of assets are targeted by different threats and using different techniques and tactics. And yeah, you need to understand that in order to properly protect this environment. Another problem with the industry is that the information about the threats and the threat intel is out there on the public internet, but it's spread all over it. So it is hard to collect all this information if you don't know where to look for. And the sources, there are a lot of sources, like typical national vulnerability databases. There's software vendor security bulletins. There are threat intel platforms like Trendmicro's ZDI, Google's open source vulnerability databases, government threat intel feeds like CERTs and CISA. All of these threat intel sources need to be monitored in order to figure out if there are any ongoing threats that may have impact on your environment. And when we correlate those information, so information about the environments and information gathered from a threat intelligence, we can create a pretty nice overview of what can go wrong in our environment and how different cyber threats can be realized, how they may affect our environments. But as you can see from that, this is very challenging because there's just a complexity and the variety of information that needs to be processed. Obviously, this can be done manually. This has to be done with the help of some tools.
Eddie, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Much appreciated. So Eddie has done a great job of setting up the threat environment for us and what we're facing. What I'd like to do is maybe hand over to Melissa. Melissa is going to talk a bit about the hacker mindset and how that can be used in threat hunting.
Okay. Thank you, Kevin. Am I sharing? Are you sharing the screen with me?
Eddie, if you can give control over to Melissa, that'd be great. Yeah.
All right, sorry. Yeah, I will give it back to you, Gavin. Yeah,
okay,
now you can give it to Melissa.
Yeah,
there we go.
You have it now, Melissa. Yeah.
Great. Okay, sorry, I got excited. Okay, so just as a quick refresher, so what is threat hunting? So if I had to put threat hunting on a coffee mug, it would be 2 words: assume compromise, right? You have your traditional red versus blue, where you have the red, which would be the threat actors or your pen test team or whatever, trying to get into the network. And that you have your blue team that is responding and defending. And threat hunting is kind of like a mixture between the two, where we try and think of it as, if I'm an attacker, what would I be looking for in our network? And then, okay, as a defender, how would I be defending against that, right? So we're kind of a nice little blend of colors. So I guess that would be purple, but we also have a purple team. I don't want to confuse this. So assume compromise. So why is threat hunting important? Well, we are trying to stop the malware, the threat actors, the commodity, the opportunists, the hacktivists as early on in the kill chain as possible. And the kill chain is, kind of this idea where you start off with trying to get information about the victim that you're trying to attack, and then you're gaining a foothold via various methods, establishing persistence, backdoors, accessing credentials, trying to get root access or domain admin, getting the information that you want, and then doing something with that, either exfilling it or deploying ransomware or whatever. And obviously, the earlier on in the kill chain that you can find these threat actors or malware, the easier it is to boot them off of your network. Because if you're getting them when they're exfilling data, you have absolutely no idea how many accounts they've compromised, how many backdoors they have. So it can be very, very hard. So the job of a threat hunter is to try and find them as early on as possible. And of course, now the slide isn't working. There we go. Oh, I got it. Very good. So the maturity phases of threat hunting. So this is obviously not all encompassing, but we have it kind of broken down into 3 different categories. You have a beginner threat hunting program where normally your CISO says, hey, I was golfing with some other CISOs and they were talking about their threat hunting program. And that sounds interesting. So you are probably part of your incident response team, and they ask you to kind of do threat hunting kind of in your downtime. And I always air quote that because you never seem to have downtime if you're doing incident response, but you're just starting out. So basically what you'd be doing is using your previous knowledge of your company that you're in. So using past incidents or things that are currently going on to create better detections and hunts. So, let's just say you suddenly have somebody using MSHTA to deploy scripts in your environment. And you think, well, let's try and see if we can see other instances of that going on in our environment. And then you start to do a hunt for that. Or based on some of the stuff that Edward was talking about with random things found on the internet, OSINT, right? You go on Twitter/X and you see that somebody posted this interesting thing of a way a threat actor got into a network. And you're like, well, let's look at that today. And then you start to move on and you have intermediate where you're leveraging frameworks such as MITRE to plug the gaps for techniques. So hopefully everyone has seen the MITRE ATT&CK framework before. If you haven't, I have a screenshot in an upcoming slide, but there's just tons of tactics, techniques, and procedures that various threat actors use of various levels of maturity. And you can just say, let's color those all red. And today I'm going to, throw a dart and say, today I'm going to focus on command scripting interpreters. Okay. So once I start creating detections and hunts based on that, I start to change that color from red to orange to yellow to green, where green is, we're 90% confident, right? Because there's nothing 100% in security for that technique. And then you would move on to something else. Or you can leverage something like MITRE Ingenuity, which basically you give it a couple of parameters, like what operating systems do you have in your environment, what level of network monitoring do you have, what level of host-based monitoring do you have, and then it'll give you the top 10 techniques that they have seen with those parameters that you've given it. And again, that will probably keep you going for about a year or so, depending on the size of your network. But then you have maturity, so you have a more mature program. And that would be, again, leveraging MITRE, but then using your Intel team to target those TTPs of threats relevant to your organization, right? So if you are a pharmaceutical company, what are the threat actors that are going to be attacking you specifically in as well as the commodity malwares, the opportunistic threats? Sorry. I don't know why the slides don't seem to want to advance for me. There we go. Okay. So the best way of doing this is an example. So you are part of a security team for a government think tank. So your Intel team has heard rumbling on the dark web of Fancy Bear or APT28 taking interest in a report that your company is due to be releasing in a few weeks, right? So probably some geopolitical interesting thing going to be coming out of that report. And your CEO is now worried that Fancy Bear is going to be targeting you to try and get that information before it is released to the general public. And then they do whatever they want to do. So they say, can you just focus your hunts on Fancy Bear? So you say, okay, so again, priorities, you obviously take that, what your CEO says, and you drop everything else and you start to work on that. So what are the TTPs of a Fancy Bear? And this is actually the ATT&CK MITRE framework. And there's a link that I can provide that. I can post that in the chat if anybody wants to see, but this is basically well, it's not all of them, because again, it's very big. This would not fit very nicely on a slide, but we have initial access. I think we're missing 2 different ones to the left of that. And then you can kind of see credential access to the right, but we're missing some additional tactics on the right-hand side. But this is how Fancy Bear likes to operate. These are the ones that they prefer to use. So again, thinking from a hacker standpoint, right, you obviously first have to get your foot in the door. So we need to probably focus on that bit first before we start to really worry about the other things. Not saying those other things aren't important, but, you know, again, if they can't get in through the front door, or you can see them trying to enter the front door, it's much easier to boot them off of your network. So focusing on our initial access, we have something sorry, let me go back. You can see that they have exploit public facing applications. So you say, okay, so hopefully your Intel team actually provides this information to you, or you might have to do this yourself, depending on, again, the size of your company. But excuse me, LugPoint did release a report about AP28, or to them, it's known as Forest Blizzard. But sorry. Okay, there we go. Sorry. Apparently the hardest thing of a presentation is actually the slides. So they basically they like to leverage a bunch of CVEs that have gone from throughout the years, early as 2010 to 2023. I'm sure there's some from 2024, but this report is slightly old. So these are the things that you want to focus on. And you look at all those CVEs and you think, wow, that's quite a lot. And so you think, okay, well, how do we know if we have devices? How do we know if they're vulnerable to these things? And where are they in our network, right? Even though they might be internal, that still is a potential way for them to get privilege escalation. So we still want to be worried about them. But again, we're probably going to focus on the outside, right? Because again, can't get in, then they have to move on and pivot to something else. So then this is where exposure management comes in. You can go to them and say, where do we have any of these devices that are vulnerable? Where are they? And then we can start to do our analysis and investigation on, is there any proof of concept code available? Can we deploy it in a lab so then we can see what the logs would look like? Is there a gap in the logs that we might have to maybe pull some things in? And then from there, we can start to hunt and then create detections based on that. So I will now hand it back to Gavin.
Hey,
He's going to talk about exposure.
Yeah, thank you, Melissa. So yeah, I mean, you bring up a really good point, right? It's all about exposure management, okay? Understanding what is relevant to the threat environment you face today. So, Eddie, maybe you can jump in here and tell us a bit about, you know, what is exposure management from your perspective. I'll hand over control to you. So Eddie, you're just on mute there, but while Eddie's coming off mute. So folks, if you have any questions, you know, please put them in the webinar chat and we'd be delighted to address them at the end of the call. So please just get your questions into the webinar chat. And then Eddie, over to you. Yeah.
Okay, sorry, I had a problem with the Zoom. Yeah. Yeah, when we look at exposure management, we got to follow some principles of identifying, accessing, managing, mitigating the risk associated with organizations. So, as I mentioned, within the challenges, within the industry challenges part, one of the most important thing is to properly identify our environments. And yeah, obviously we got to use tools for that. And by tools, I don't only mean like platforms like a software to do that, but also tools in form of the processes and procedures that have to be taken, like, for example, penetration testing, using threat modeling, using adversary simulation engagement types. These are also the tools that have to be used when performing exposure management. And one of the most important things that I always repeat to our customers is that you can't only rely on a single tool and think it will help you to manage the whole attack surface that you may have and its exposure to the threats. You actually got to take a synergy from different tools. Like, for example, you know, because those tools, different tools operate better in their in the area of interest. Like, for example, Tanium is a very good scanner, vulnerability scanner that is host-based. So when you install the agents on the host, on the endpoint, you can monitor the platforms and collect the information about the platforms on a single host, but you're not able to do that on the network devices like routers, printers, access points, and other type of stuff. There is, for example, Nessus, which is a very good network scanner, but it won't be able to properly identify different threats affecting web applications. For that, we can use Burpsuit or WP Scanner or other tools. Summarizing the concept here is in a solution where we're using different tools and the synergy of the data produced by those tools in order to properly identify the asset inventory and overall assets in the environments, including all the types of assets that I mentioned previously. Another thing to do is to create to follow a proper threat modeling process. So once we define our security requirements and we identify the attack surface with the different tools that we may have, we got to outline the architecture, and then we can identify different threats, both with those tools that were mentioned, with like softwares that were mentioned, but also looking at the threat landscape and the different threat hunting techniques that Melissa mentioned, to, at the end of that process, being able to estimate the risk and prioritize it properly for different assets in different parts of our environment. Another part of proper exposure management is the monitoring part. And yeah, obviously we're speaking here about solutions like SIEM, where the teams, where the owners of the environments can look at every things that are happening, every events that are happening in their environments and find out those that look suspicious or malicious. But here I just point out a couple of the problems that we're seeing from an offensive point of view, from a hacker's point of view. We're seeing those problems and we're abusing those issues where people try to do a proper monitoring as a part of exposure management. So one of the typical problems is with the coverage. And obviously, yeah, I've seen organizations have problems with properly cover the things that they monitor, not only speaking about seeing different assets, like including them as a log sources to their SIEM system, but also having a deep level of logging. For example, if you know what Sysmon is on a Windows devices, it provides a lot of information about things that happen on the Windows system, and it can help to properly identify suspicious activity in the environment if it's enabled. But if it's disabled, yeah, then the defense team can miss a lot of things happening in the environment. The size of the monitored environment is also a problem because, yeah, as I mentioned, like enabling this Sysmon environment, it will create a lot of events, so it will require a big amount of computing resources in order to being able to identify those information. Also, we're seeing that the log rotation is sometimes a problem when monitoring the environments. Another thing is being able to react 20 hours a day, 7 days a week, because, you know, threat actors typically are active when normal people sleep. So we'll seeing activities at, you know, Friday evening or at the weekends or during night hours. If you don't monitor, you don't have proper system to monitor incidents that are happening in those out of business hours, then yeah, you may be threatened by an attack. The problem lies with detecting the behavior anomalies, right? Currently threat actors are far beyond using typical malware that can be easily identified by antivirus software. Currently, threat actors are using legitimate tools, but they use it in a way that's like it's not normal behavior. It's identified as an anomaly. And yeah, if the tools or the teams that are doing the monitoring don't have proper rules to identify that, this is also a problem for exposure management. Time to response, detection and prevention. This is also one of the typical problems we're seeing in the environments where people tend to detect the threats or threat actors or some suspicious activity in the environment, but there is no action, there is no response to those incidents, or the response is done too late. So, for example, we had cases where we performed a phishing campaign on our customers, and couple of minutes later, after starting the campaign, we're receiving information that somebody discovered our phishing, returned a reply to that phishing, but didn't react properly to that. So they didn't notify their coworkers, their colleagues in the office. And while somebody did discover that phishing campaign, they didn't prevent that. There was no reaction in order to block the domain, block the sender, or eventually prevent the campaign of happening. Time to respond and use of traitorware is also another problem with monitoring. So yeah, summarizing, when we look at all those problems, it's what we're seeing during the monitoring is just the tip of the iceberg, but there's a lot of happening under the hood, and those things need to be monitored properly in order to be able to identify the risk and react on any potential threats that may happen or are happening right now in your environments. And yeah, just I don't know how we stay with time, but just to give you a couple of examples, of the latest thing we're doing when we're fighting with problems. The latest thing that we're doing as an offensive security experts, that is a problem for the defense and problem with doing the proper exposure management, is a traitorware. So traitorware refers to a software that is legitimate and is simply abused by threat actors to cause some negative impact on the environment. So this is just an example, but threat actors, we were able to abuse Sentinel-1, which is a tool made to protect and defend environments against threat actors, but we will manage to abuse this tool in order to gather some credentials. And just to clarify, this is not a problem with the tool itself. This is a problem with how the tool is used and what capabilities it have, what functionality it provides. And I'm going step back to the challenges that I mentioned in the beginning. If you don't understand your environment, which is the types of asset that we use and the software that you use, how it works and how it looks, you may be threatened by some attacks. So in this example, because the victim didn't understand how Sentinel-1 looked and created some weakness in their environment, we were able to combine those weaknesses in order to perform a full attack and compromise the environment. So what can you do to defend yourself, to properly manage that exposure, the attack surface and exposure to the threats? Couple of tips that I always give to everybody is, first of all, use the KISS principle. It says, keep it simple, stupid. So it is a very old military-based principle saying that you simply should only create and use and hold the assets type that you're actually using in your environment. Don't hold legacy system. Don't remove any garbage from your environments. Next thing, use synergy of the tools, the thing that I've mentioned during the exposure management, because there is no silver bullet. There is no tool that performs, that can handle the whole attack surface. You got to use the synergy of different tools through integrators and hubs, so it will be easier to manage this. Use principle of least privilege. So provide only the functionality, ability to the people that they need to perform their actions. Don't give them more privileges that they should have. implement different layers of security. So use things to detect incidents at early stage, use tools like penetration testing, vulnerability assessment, or adversary simulation, detect interaction on your endpoints, detect suspicious activity on your network. Now, at the end of the day, the final impact of every attack happens at the end of an attack chain. So if you're able to prevent the attack at any of the step by implementing proper security at one of the layers, you probably will prevent the final impact. Use the MITRE ATT&CK matrix that Melissa showed you. I mean, I'm telling to everybody, this is one of the best tool invented by the cybersecurity community. Whenever you're doing any type of engagement, whether it's simple vulnerability assessment, penetration test, phishing assessment, try to correlate the identified problems with MITRE ATT&CK and defend, because those frameworks give up very nice information, including the detection and mitigation techniques that can be implemented to fix the problems, to remediate the issues that you have in your environment, and keep up the proper inventory management.
Thank you, Eddie. Much appreciated. So just a couple of questions, folks. Maybe Melissa, if I can go to you first, if that's okay. So you talked a lot about threat hunting and the different stages of maturity from a threat hunting perspective. What advice would you give to the folks on the webinar here in terms of prioritizing work from a threat hunting perspective?
Sure. So priorities usually go in terms of what your management tells you to do, right? If I get a ping from my manager, my boss, I'm like, well, everything I'm doing is now dropping, and I'm going to focus on what they want me to do. When when 0 days drop, or really high CVEs, that usually becomes a priority, because again, we're working with vulnerability management, exposure management to try and say, is this something that we need to be concerned about? And then we start to do that research. And then again, when I say focusing on the things that, if we know that there's a gap somewhere, so if we have a lot of Macs in our environment, there's a lot of detections, a lot of EDR tools are great on Windows-based malware, but sometimes on the Macs and Linux side can be have a lot more holes. So then we're trying to patch those holes by doing threat hunting, and then again, creating those detections. Hopefully that answers the question.
No, super. Thank you. Thanks a million. And then question for you, Eddie. So I mean, everybody on the call here, right? We're all constrained from a resource perspective, and we all need to know that, understand we need to act very fast in the event of a known threat to our environment. I mean, what role does automation have to play in threat hunting and exposure management?
Oh, a crucial role, I would say, because as I mentioned, the time to react on an incident is very important. Like I've give those examples where we've been like we even had cases where our customer was telling us, hey guys, we're seeing some malicious activity in our network. Is that you? Like when doing a penetration test, I mean, like, yeah, it's us, but you actually should have if you saw that, you should have prevented that in the first place and then ask questions. So this is how automation is important, because as when we're doing threat actors are doing, typical attack, they obviously don't type their attack chain by hands, right? They create a script, and script is executing in a matter of seconds. So if you don't have proper automation that will be able to detect and contain the threat within its initial phase, then you will detect that something wrong happened on your environment, but it will be already too late.
Okay, thank you, Eddie. So I don't think we've any questions for the audience, other questions for the audience, Melissa, Eddie. So I want to just finish up by saying that was fantastic, really, really insightful. I love the kind of structure and the approach you guys took to this. Really appreciated the insights. Again, this is Smart Tech, building on the conversation we started with 0 Day Con. And a massive thank you to Melissa Goldsmith and Eddie Skraba for their contribution today. The webinar will be recorded, so please look out for that link. And thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your day, folks. Much appreciated.